I just want to say again, as indeed Mr. Leung knows, and his statement was very interesting concerning the basic law, that it is guaranteed by an international treaty and the scrutiny of the UN, and it is not, as indeed you've not stated, and that was very honest from you, sir, it is not a purely internal affair. Thank you.
Harry?
Well, I mean, if you like elections, by all means, have as many as you want, and as often as you want. Maybe everyday referendum is better than elections. Eventually, you'll produce some good leaders, I'm sure. But don't force other people to have them, or have them in your way. That's my point, that's all.
Okay. But today, this session, the emphasis is not just China, but really China in the context of globalization. As we all know, globalization is nothing new in the world. Historically, it goes up and down. Sometimes it is stronger, other times weaker. I'm reminded that 2,000 years ago at the Silk Road, which is today, if you want, the Chinese call them Belt and Road Initiative. I don't know what's the difference, about the same. The Silk Road 2,000 years ago was when there's a lot of trade interactions between China and the other East Asian countries, as well as a lot of Middle East and even all the way to Europe. So historically, 2,000 years ago, globalization was with us. Over time, it ebbs and flows. The next event I will mention is perhaps 1401. What happened in 1401? A Chinese admiral, who, by the way, is of Islam background, he went all the way to East Africa and to the Gulf states. That was 1400-something. So that was another sign of the globalization of this world. 1453, when the Ottoman Empire took over Istanbul or Constantinople, the land link was somewhat cut, and hence the sea route began to flow again. And in 1492, when Columbus went to the New World, that was another step in the globalization, except that the ship that Columbus has was only about 20% that of Admiral Zheng He's from China 90 years before that. While the rest of the world was globalizing, China decided to go the opposite direction. And that was perhaps the beginning of the waning of the Chinese empire. It caused me to think, I cannot help but think, today who is the most anti-globalized country in the world? It is no longer China. China, after being part of globalization, closed up itself and now finally globalized again. China is today very much for globalization. It was only 2001 when they joined WTO. The rest of the world welcomed China to the globalized world. So this less than 20 years ago. Little did we expect at that time that today, the West, in particular, the United States, which was for sure the leader of the globalized world, at least starting with end of World War II, should be today perhaps the one that is the least open to globalization. So these are all factors that are affecting us today, and I find it very, very amusing. Here, let me just say two other points. The first one is, a lot of people assume that America is for multilateralism, America is for globalization, America is a country that is for internationalization. Not so. Read American history. America, for the first 100-some years, if not 200 years, was close to 200 years, was very much an isolationist. It was really World War II that brought the United States to become the leader of the so-called globalization world. And so today, what we are seeing America first, as somebody mentioned earlier in the last session, what they are doing with the trade war, is America in some way going back to its old habit of isolationism rather than open to the rest of the world. So these are all issues that are confronting us today. And what will the world be like if America indeed moves more and more toward isolationism? What will happen to Europe? What role will China play? And that is the topic of our discussion here today. Will China, together with EU, perhaps also India, maybe Japan, become leaders in the globalization process? These are very interesting issues for us to address. So with that, I will first, I have two very distinguished guests here. You all know Mr. C.Y. Leung. He is a professional in his earlier life, and then he was very much involved in the drafting of the basic law that governed the return of Hong Kong to her motherland, China. And eventually he became the chief executive of Hong Kong for 5 years, ending about 2.5 years ago. And to my far left is Eric. Some of you may know Eric, but I doubt. If you watch TED Talks, you will see Eric, because Eric is a pretty hot TED Talk guy. Educated in UC Berkeley, and then MBA from Stanford, and finally his doctorate from Fudan University in Shanghai. He is a venture capitalist. He also is a founder and chairman of the biggest internet platform, media platform in China called Guancha Syndicate. So we have some very interesting persons here. So with that, can I first invite Eric? Eric, you have a background in the West, you have a background in China. Tell us, what does that mean in today's day and age for China to be part of the globalized world?
Okay, well, thank you, Ronnie. I'll be brief. It shouldn't take me to tell you that globalization is in deep trouble. It's not going anywhere. In fact, I think we're also going to a phase of deglobalization, as Professor Blanchard pointed out this morning. And globalization in the last 2 or 3 decades has had great successes and many beneficiaries. China, obviously, is one of the greatest beneficiaries, but so are the US and much of the developed world. And that's obvious if you just look at the data and how people live. So why is it in trouble? I think globalization, this round of it, has also had many great failures. In fact, most of the developing countries in the last 20, 30 years of globalization had not really benefited that much, not as much as they should. At least the peoples of the many developing countries have not benefited. Poverty persists, and inequality is increasing. China succeeded in lifting 700-800 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years. But if you take China's number out, the world had gone backwards on poverty alleviation. There's even more poor people after this round of globalization. And the same is in the developed countries. In America and Europe, inequality is increasing tremendously. That's why there's a backlash. Interestingly, China joined the WTO in 2002. From 2002 to 2018, Chinese GDP went from 1.4 trillion to 13 trillion, so huge increase. But the US made just as much money, if you will, in terms of absolute dollar amount. US GDP went from 10 trillion to 20 trillion, obviously from a higher base. So absolute dollar amount increases are close. Yet, Chinese median income in the same period went up 7x. The US, stagnant, had declined. So why is that? What's the problem? And also globalization in the last 20, 30 years have shattered many communities. And if you go to in most developed countries, in America, people on opiates, they've lost hope. In Europe, 20, 30-year-olds are getting on the streets to fight for their pensions. So globalization has had many failures. And why had globalization failed in so many respects? I'd like to suggest that this last round of globalization has been run on a universal vision of neoliberal doctrines, which essentially has consisted of political liberalization with endless elections that don't produce good leaders, total marketization, privatization of businesses, a retreat of the state. In fact, I'll let Mr. Liang speak to Hong Kong, but Hong Kong as a separate economic entity in China had very much suffered from neoliberal approach to economic development in the last 20, 30 years that have enriched the elites but left so many people behind. That's probably, I see the current situation in Hong Kong is very much a Chinese version of Gilets jaunes in Hong Kong. So what do? Do we turn back and say no more globalization, or do we find a new approach? And I think the Chinese proposition is that we need to find a new approach to revitalize globalization, but we have to abandon what we've been doing in the last 30 years. And the Chinese proposition includes a few main aspects. One is to dramatically increase interconnectivity among the countries and economies that have been left behind in globalization. And in concrete form is in BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, where China has been investing tremendous amount of money and resources into building infrastructure to connect previously disconnected economies, okay, improving interconnectivity. Second is to reject ideological imposition. I always say that China has engaged globalization in the last 30 years on its own terms. That's why it's been successful. It's important to point out what China said no to the last round of globalization is just as important to what China said yes to. China said yes to rely on market to allocate resources, but China said no to giving up national sovereignty, to political liberalization, to total marketization, and the retreat of state power. China said no to many things. And therefore, China's proposition for a new round of globalization would be a reliance, a revitalization of national sovereignty, to give different countries their own room and space to pursue their own paths, to choose their own models. And on that basis, third is that we create a more networked world. So it's a networked way of networked pluralism as opposed to a hegemonically led universalism. And that is, I think, what China's proposition will be, and it's still in nascent stage, and I think the world should be open to it and work with China with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Mr. Leung, there has been some questions about Hong Kong today, so you can talk about both. I suppose we should, Terry, answer part of that question raised by several people in the earlier session. So you can say a word about globalization if you like, or you can talk about Hong Kong, he being the one who is perhaps most qualified to address the issue of Hong Kong today.
I'll stand up, just in case I might fall asleep. I had prepared something to address the theme of this session, which is China's or Chinese position on globalization. I'm throwing this away now because I heard Thierry in his opening remarks mentioning Hong Kong a couple of times, and so did Eric just now. We have had 4 months of non-stop troubles in Hong Kong, and it's going on. As far as the violence is concerned, it's trending down. The number of rioters and peaceful demonstrators have been going down together. In this trending down motion, we might, if we are not careful or lucky, see some spikes in the degree of violence or the scale of casualties. The police and other authorities in Hong Kong have exercised a maximum restraint. And that's why I listen to you. And that's why we are not seeing the kind of casualties in the streets of Hong Kong as we would have seen in other parts of the world. democracy. Hong Kong is not a sovereign state. Hong Kong is part of China. So when we look at democracy or the process of democratization in Hong Kong, we shouldn't compare Hong Kong to a sovereign state. We should and could only compare democracy and democratization in Hong Kong to those in cities, Paris, London, New York, Tokyo, Washington, D.C. But Hong Kong is not an ordinary city because under the Basic Law and under the terms of Hong Kong's return to China, and this was promulgated in 1990, after 5 years of intensive and large-scale consultation in Hong Kong and also in the rest of the country, the Basic Law was promulgated in 1990. Under the Basic Law, Hong Kong was given not just one country, two systems. It was given one country, two systems, comma, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong, comma, with a high degree of autonomy. Not complete autonomy, but a high degree of autonomy. And this high degree of autonomy is well defined in the Basic Law. And there are altogether 160 articles in the Basic Law, all in black and white, which has been practiced for 22 years now. So when we talk about one country, two systems, or when we talk about democracy, these are no longer abstract concepts for Hong Kong. They are part of our constitutional and legal arrangements. Now, China, if I have to make a guess, could straight away say to the people in Hong Kong that you could have your own way of electing your chief executive, the head of Hong Kong government. If the result of the election is to produce a chief executive that has the same degree of autonomy and the same scale of authority as the mayors of London, Washington, D.C., Tokyo, New York, Paris. But speaking as a former chief executive, I can tell you, and you can look up Basic Law, and the Basic Law is available in both languages, English and Chinese. It's on the website. You can do it now. The chief executive of Hong Kong is given a much higher degree of authority, and through the exercise of this high degree of, is given a high degree of authority, and through exercise of this high degree of authority, Hong Kong attains its high degree of autonomy. Local democratic processes do not produce mayors of chief executives in the case of Hong Kong that has this high degree of authority, and local cities do not have this high degree of autonomy. So where does the additional authority come from? It comes from a top-down process. So it's not entirely bottom-up, meaning the delegation of authority by the electorate to this elected person. In addition to this process, which we have in Hong Kong, the central authorities in Beijing, through the appointment of the chief executive, devolves certain power that normally belongs to central governments, to the chief executive, and therefore Hong Kong government, and therefore Hong Kong as a whole. And therefore, in our electoral system, and it's in the Basic Law again, we have so far election committee elections, an election committee of 1,200 drawn from different sectors of the Hong Kong community. And at the end of the election process, the person has to be appointed by the central government. And this appointment is neither ceremonial nor nominal. And it's a real authority to appoint, meaning the central government in law can appoint or not appoint the elected candidate. So that's democracy in Hong Kong. The Basic Law also says that universal suffrage election is the ultimate goal in the democratic development of Hong Kong. But a universally elected chief executive candidate still has to be appointed by the central government. And to change from the present system of election by election committee to universal suffrage election, it is in Annex 1 to the Basic Law. Again, you could look it up. The approval of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of the country, not Hong Kong, of the country in Beijing, is required. So these are the constitutional and legal arrangements. As I said, if the chief executive in a democratic society representing people of Hong Kong, as the, if you like, a mayor of Hong Kong, has only that kind of power, Beijing would have said to universal suffrage straight away. And I could look at the flip side of the question. Now, would cities in other democratic countries, including those in the West, have this kind of high degree of autonomy just through the election of the local mayor by the local electorate without the central government or the federal government having any power, any say in the process? Question mark. So these are the manifestations of the principle of one country, two systems that have already been enshrined in the Basic Law and it's a legal document. The 5 demands of the protesters and the rioters in Hong Kong include universal suffrage in Hong Kong. And to them, universal suffrage is not universal suffrage according to the Basic Law. They want Hong Kong to do it by themselves without the involvement of Beijing. So we are stuck. When I was chief executive, we actually went through a process, the so-called constitutional reform process in 2014 that led to Occupy Central. In the end, the whole movement died down. Beijing actually offered the opportunity of the election of the chief executive by universal suffrage. But some of the young students in certain quarters of the Hong Kong community will not have it because they did not like what's written in the Basic Law, and they wanted open nomination of the chief executive candidates. So it's a complex, complicated issue, technical, but I thought I should seize on this opportunity. I'm sure you have your concerns about the future of Hong Kong. We do too, but we have to go by the Basic Law. Hong Kong is a law-based, rule-based society. We have to go through rule of law. Again, one country, two systems, high degree of autonomy, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong. Democracy in Hong Kong is no longer an abstract notion. It's all in the constitutional arrangements. Thank you.
Okay, we can, I'll open it very quickly, very soon to everybody. You're going to ask anything about globalization or Hong Kong, but let me just say one last thing. And that is, I find it very interesting sitting here in Africa in the presence of many of my European friends, that Europeans, when they went to Asia, when they went to Africa, they plunder those places. And coming from Hong Kong, I should know. And they colonized those places and took natural resources, while the Chinese today, they are paying for natural resources. They are buying them instead of plundering them. I remember 20-some years ago, I bumped into Newt Gingrich in Davos. And he was the first one that told me, he said, Ronnie, pay attention to Africa. There's a lot of potential there. So I began to come to Africa. And I cannot help, 23 years later, ask the question, what has America done in Africa? Is that what Eric called hegemonic globalization? Or what is China beginning to do today, what he called something like connected globalization, such that at least to begin with on an economic basis, where all the countries that can begin to share the economic benefit of globalization. So Eric, if you have anything to add it now. If not, I'll open to the floor. We have plenty of time. Okay?
5 seconds, but
Okay.
what I mean by hegemonic globalization, hegemonic universalism is to have one hegemonic leader that applies the same set of standards and rules on everybody, as opposed to what I call networked pluralism, is to allow different countries to engage globalization on their own terms.
Thank you. Okay. I was in London the last few days. 5 people told me how that the Hong Kong police was so restrained in the streets compared to Paris, Barcelona, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, London. So I encourage all of you, I don't want to debate this issue, just watch the full footage rather than the one snapshot picked by the media. Watch the whole thing, and then we'll have a discussion on that, okay? There's several people, the 2 gentlemen here in the front, the one back there first, and then the gentleman here, and then finally our friend from Ethiopia.
Thank you, Hervé Mariton. First, a quick question to Eric Lee. Well, a statement in a way. In the way you describe political elections in the West as often tied and complex process, indeed, and you're right on that. But maybe we prefer tied and difficult elections to no elections at all. Second question, actually, to the whole panel and the moderator, indeed. Don't you believe, dear Chinese friends, that actually the attitude presently in Hong Kong would rather draw most of our countries, I'm French, in more liking towards the US in the evolution of globalization? Globalization could be a multilateral process. As was stated previously in the morning, Europe could stand in a way between China and the US in the idea that there should not be a US domination or Chinese domination. But since we believe that many of our values are presently challenged, maybe we feel more of a community of values with the US and the Western world. I just want to say again, as indeed Mr. Leung knows, and his statement was very interesting concerning the basic law, that it is guaranteed by an international treaty and the scrutiny of the UN, and it is not, as indeed you've not stated, and that was very honest from you, sir, it is not a purely internal affair. Thank you.
Eric?
Well, I mean, if you like elections, by all means, have as many as you want, and as often as you want. Maybe everyday referendum is better than elections. Eventually, you'll produce some good leaders, I'm sure. But don't force other people to have them, or have them in your way. That's my point, that's all.
Okay. The Chinese don't force their system on others, right? Okay, thank you. CY?
On the question, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's on.
Thank you. On the question of the international treaty, I presume you're referring to the treaty known as the Joint Declaration, signed in 1985, ratified in 1985 between China and the United Kingdom. Insofar as the election is concerned, the election chief secretaries are concerned in the Joint Declaration, just in case a few of our friends in the audience might buy the allegation that China goes back on its commitment to democratization in Hong Kong, set out in the Joint Declaration. Let me read this to you. The Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall be selected by election or through consultations held locally and be appointed by the Central People's Government, period. In other words, if China wanted to do away with the election committee election, which produced me as a last-term chief executive, and replaced it by consultations, through consultations held locally, and then appoint the person at the end of the constitution process, China would not have breached the Joint Declaration.
My comment to you, sir, is when you talk about the community of values, that's wonderful. I think the West has really brought some very good value to the world. That is, frankly, common to human nature. And you do it one way, you enshrine them, you codify them, which is very good. But I asked Angela Merkel one time, about 6-7 years ago in Berlin, I said, Madam Chancellor, you keep talking about shared value. I said, I come from Hong Kong, which is now part of China, as an ethnic Chinese. Am I supposed to share your value? By saying so many times, you draw a line on the sand and say, I am on this side, are you on my side, or are you on the other side? I don't know what is the experience of the African friends. They have tried democracy since World War II. I wonder how many of them have been very, very successful. Perhaps there are other ways. Why should we fashion ourselves only after one way of achieving the common value, right? So shall we not allow others to do it their way as well? Mind you that Europeans and Americans only account for about 1 billion of the world's people. There's another 6.5 billion out there that are they supposed to share your value and do it your way? It's just a question to be left for the audience to answer yourselves. Sir?
Let me quickly, excuse me, let me very quickly chip in, tongue-in-cheek. When I was a young child, I had this idealistic view of ultimate democracy for mankind on this planet. And this is, let all people in this world elect one leader and one government, a global leader and a global government. We now have 7 billion people on this planet, 1.4 billion Chinese, 1 billion Indians, and so on and so forth. Share values, democracy, ultimate democracy, one government, one leader, who that leader would be. What value would that be? Question mark. Now, that was when Xi Huailang was a young child with a rather simplistic view of life, the world. Now I know the world is much more complex than that. I don't hold that view anymore. And I know the realities and the practicalities. Thank you.
Sir, the gentleman in the second row.
Thank you. I'm coming from Israel. But I said, Mr. Lang said in the beginning when you spoke about Hong Kong that something which contradicts election. You said there will be an election, and after somebody had been elected, then the government of China had to appoint him. That's contradict election, what we know in the West, of course. I admire the possibility and the power of China to control 1.5 billion people. It's unbelievable. I see what happens in most very small countries, as I said, with a lot of problems, and not with 1.5 billion. But still, I'm afraid that what happens in Hong Kong today is not good for China because of 2 reasons. One is the fact that they prove that it is possible to make achievement by protests. It could move, it could be export to China itself, to the mainland. Secondly, I'm not sure that this kind of action against the idea of sending the prisoners from Hong Kong to China to be judged is really important for China compared to these riots that you have in Hong Kong. Aren't you afraid about what we call the Maslow ladder, which now in China are coming up? You know, Maslow ladder say that the first stage of people is they want to have security, and then second stage, they want to have food. And only when they have security and food, they want to teach, to study. And after they study, they want to put their opinion, and they want to be involved in politics. I said that according when I follow China, I see that people are now standing in the 4th stage, which means the people of China would like, in my opinion, in the future to see themselves much more with an point to bring their opinion to the government, which means you will, in my opinion, China will face in the next future a lot of activity of Chinese people which would like, they would like very much to be involved in the political process and elect their own people. And maybe you will face in China what you are facing today in Hong Kong. So can you please relate to that? Thank you.
Sure. The experiences that we have in Hong Kong, internet-based, so-called be water approach, to rally as many people as possible to disrupt normal lives of ordinary people and ordinary businesses, big and small, in Hong Kong. It's not patented. The first trial is in Hong Kong. Whether it's going to be successful or not And I do not wish this on any country in the world. I do not wish this. But my guess is it will replicate itself in other countries. So Hong Kong is not an island. Other countries are not islands either. No man is an island. If we succumb to these violent and disruptive movements for unlawful demands on our basic law, other countries and other governments would suffer. That's point one. Point two, the central government of China, Beijing, has no role at all in the proposed amendment of the fugitive ordinance. It was initiated by the Hong Kong government. Nearly all laws, except certain national laws such as nationality, national emblem, national anthem, and so on, all laws enacted by the Hong Kong government, and that's part of the high degree of autonomy they enjoy. So it wasn't initiated by Beijing. Beijing has no role in that. Point number two. Point number three, this is not the first time Hong Kong enacts a piece of legislation or amend it or enter into a treaty with another jurisdiction to send fugitives back. In the proposed, now it's been withdrawn formally, in the proposed amendment, we have put in more safeguards into the proposed amendment. There are already 22 jurisdictions in different parts of the world. I shouldn't name them. If I wanted to be discourteous to some of these countries, I should, so that you know that the record of rule of law in some of these 22 jurisdictions is actually not as good as the mainland of China. And I do ask the question, if people living in Hong Kong are so scared of facing trial on the mainland of China, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Shenzhen, why would these cities on the mainland host millions of foreign business people living there? So these are the...
Including Hong Kong.
Including Hong Kong. So these are the points that I would make. But let me just repeat what I said earlier. I'm beginning to see signs of people, now whether right or wrong, as Chinese people, we don't try to sort of poke our fingers in other people's pies. We are seeing the so-called Extinction Rebellion movement in parts of Europe copying the Hong Kong protesters' so-called be water approach. So be careful.
I can't let that one go without two quick comments. Okay, one, the situation in Hong Kong happens to be the greatest birthday gift God has given to President Xi Jinping for the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic. Let me explain why. It's completely unified. It's the opposite of what you are predicting. It's completely unified public opinion in mainland China. It's unbelievable. It's showing the Chinese people liberalism's failures and why they shouldn't have it. So it's the opposite. And second, to your second point, elections, all that are great, and democracy is great when we're all for it, But the fact is, liberal democracy is no longer producing governments that respond to the will of the people. Everywhere in the world, almost. I mean, you see that in public opinion poll after poll after poll in 9 out of 10 liberal democratic countries. The elections don't deliver governments that respond to the interests and the will of the people. So so maybe it doesn't work at this time.
I have a problem. And all of you have a problem. There's 4 hands. Two gentlemen from Africa.
He's been waiting.
Well, one gentleman here, and then a lady over there.
We've overrun by 5 minutes.
Huh? Yeah, I know. We're already overrunning. Yeah. So, Jerry, tell me what to do. Okay, sir, please.
Yeah. I would like to raise 3 questions. While Hong Kong is important, but I would like this panel to focus on the other important issues also. I represent Africa. I want to listen to them questions that will affect our continent. So if I may ask, on the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, I believe it's an important project and program. And the way I see it is, there has been 3 infrastructure miracles in this 20th century. The Suez Canal, which connected Asia and Europe, the Panama Canal, which changes the trade pattern, and Eurotunnel, which connected UK and Europe. There might have been some geopolitical impact of this infrastructure. Maybe the British had bigger role, benefit on Suez Canal, the US on the Panama Canal, but ultimately it was an important force to connect. So my question here on the infrastructure is, as it appears now, the BRI primarily focuses across Asia, Europe, and even the maritime or silk connects some part of Africa. How can the BRI be designed in a way that it doesn't exclude Africa and Africa benefits from this connection? The second point, we want to see more productive investment to Africa. Ethiopia has benefited from Chinese manufacturing investment, and of all investment in Ethiopia, 67% of companies are investing in manufacturing. We want to see more because we need employment. Africa needs to create 20 million jobs every single year. And that's why the G20 countries developed compact with Africa. We are not seeing sufficient relocation of Chinese investment. They are mainly focused in Asia, which I would say a backyard of China. So how can the private sector, the Chinese government, give special attention to this idea? The last point, there may be differences in political view, but we need to work on the common ground of the United Nations principle. For African countries, we don't want any big powers to intervene in internal affairs. Non-interference is one of the basic principles of the United Nations, and I believe we have always to be reminded of this principle.
Thank you, sir. With that, can I ask the gentleman at the back also to ask his question, and then we'll answer it together. I'm really in trouble. 8-minute overtime. There's still 2 hands over there and more. Yes, sir.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je m'appelle Robert Dossou. Je suis président de l'Association africaine de droit international et ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République du Bénin. Vous avez interpellé l'Afrique. Le représentant du Premier ministre d'Éthiopie a répondu sous un aspect. Moi, je donnerai ma réponse sous forme de question. Vous avez soulevé la question des droits de l'homme et je pose la question suivante. Est-ce qu'un être humain, du seul fait qu'il est être humain, qu'il soit noir, vert, jaune, blanc, rouge ou chocolat, comme vous voulez, n'a-t-il pas des droits communs avec toute l'humanité entière? Voilà la question. Quelles que soient les modalités de mise en œuvre. Deuxième question sur la démocratie. Est-ce que le concept de démocratie ne dégage pas ou n'est pas fondé sur des paramètres communs à toute l'humanité, quelles que soient les modalités de mise en œuvre? Parce qu'en Afrique, si nous examinons les instruments qui ont été adoptés en matière de droits de l'homme, en matière de démocratie, par l'Union africaine et par les communautés économiques régionales, on trouve quelque chose de très fort. Mais quand on les confronte à la mise en œuvre sur le terrain, on rencontre des spécificités où l'on va jusqu'à dire que la démocratie n'est pas faite pour l'Africain. On a entendu ça. Merci.
Thank you. This gentleman, I have to, and then the lady at the very back, and then we have to call it quit. We're already in 10-minute overtime. I want to get out of this country tomorrow. I don't want to be detained here. Need to go to work. Yes, sir.
Merci. Toujours l'Afrique. Lay Choubi, ancien ministre Algérie. Je voudrais très rapidement, pour aboutir à une question qui me semble essentielle, sur le débat de la globalisation et des approches de développement. Mais auparavant, je voudrais faire un lien entre la session de tout à l'heure et celle de maintenant. L'acteur essentiel de la démocratie, c'est la société. L'acteur majeur de l'économie, c'est la société. Ce que nous remarquons dans les crises actuelles, Irak, Libye, Mali, Soudan, c'est des fractures territoriales majeures. Pays kurdes, Benghazi, nord du Mali. Cela veut dire que la question de la fracture territoriale et la question des fractures sociales est un élément constitutif majeur et du développement et de la démocratie. Rapporté aux approches de globalisation, est-ce que derrière la grande question du financement et de l'endettement des infrastructures, le développement infrastructurel est essentiel pour un développement durable et un développement, une modernisation de société et de territoire? Or, les approches jusque-là, vous l'avez dit, ont été différentes. Pour les uns, on estime que ça n'est pas rentable, donc on ne finance pas, et donc il y a la question de l'endettement, encore que les États-Unis, sur les dernières années, ont changé totalement leur approche et leur législation sur le financement des infrastructures en Afrique. Et donc, lorsqu'on dit aux Africains, attention, tel pays est en train de vous endetter, on oublie de dire que les pays en question qui soulèvent cette question ont fait de l'endettement dans l'approche de leur développement une question majeure. L'Europe est un des continents les plus endettés. Nous avons 325% d'endettement à l'échelon mondial et beaucoup de grands, y compris le vice-président de la banque, l'ancien vice-président de la banque britannique, dit que l'endettement menace l'Europe. Mais est-ce que derrière tout cela, il n'y a pas une question d'approche? Quand on voit nos amis chinois ou nos amis européens sur les grandes questions, la route de la soie ou la route de la démarche de globalisation, pour les uns, ils estiment devoir structurer la périphérie pour la moderniser, la faire aboutir à un certain niveau pour pouvoir continuer un espace. Et vous l'avez dit, c'est latent. Vous avez dit il y a 1 milliard en face de 6 milliards. Vous estimez que donc la structuration de la périphérie, la mettre à un niveau est une question majeure, donc en partie. Donc la question du financement de l'infrastructure se pose autrement que la question de l'endettement. Donc ma question, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas des approches totalement divergentes dans ce fameux débat de la globalisation, ce débat de la démocratisation et ce débat développement ou croissance? Merci.
Thank you. The last question from the lady at the back there, please.
Unfortunately,
sorry.
it's not a lady.
Oh, I'm sorry.
but
It's
fine.
my
No,
apology.
it's fine. No,
It's
it's
old
fine.
age.
It's better. And
Your hair is beautiful.
And I have hair.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Stephen Erlanger from the New York Times. And I was in Hong Kong the night of the actual handover, and I tried to follow it. I've been very struck by the defensive tone of all of you, mixed with an aggressiveness, which I find striking and common now when I hear Hong Kong Chinese and mainland Chinese speak to Western audiences. Actually, I don't think anybody cares whether China has democratic elections or not. No one's forcing you to do it. What I would like to know is, do you think Xi Jinping announcing himself as emperor for life and creating Xi Jinping thought as an equivalent to Mao is a good thing for China or a bad thing?
Okay, we will. I'll leave it to Eric and Mr. Leung.
Well, emperor for life, certainly he didn't pronounce that, and that sounds like to me a lot more aggressive and defensive on the part of the New York Times than anything that we've ever said. I don't think that deserves a good, a sensible response. Of course, he's not emperor for life. We had a constitutional amendment that got rid of term limits for the role of the presidency. General Secretary, the role of General Secretary never had term limits, but we have retirement customs, so that are supposed to be followed. So he's not emperor for life. And let me come back to our friend from Ethiopia. Of course, Africa is an integral, important part of the BRI vision. The Eurasian mass being united through infrastructure and Africa being linked into the Eurasian mass, I think creates tremendous opportunities. Now, China is a new kid on the block, We haven't been at it for very long. So we're going to make plenty of mistakes, okay? Our companies don't know what to do in these new countries. Our companies don't know how to work with local communities, for instance. Because in China, we have county party secretary who's like a CEO who helps the company. In these different countries, the situation is completely different. So we need help. And what Africa could do, and I hope it will do, is for African countries to produce great and strong leaders, like Mr. Kagame, who will be speaking tonight, like Mr. Ahmed, perhaps, is on the way of becoming. And only with strong leaders can you take advantage of what China has to offer. So that's that. I've forgotten the questions.
Okay, Steve Wright.
Let me just very quickly respond to the Belt and Road questions. If we in Hong Kong, or we in the rest of the country, China, could do anything to promote better mutual understanding, not just of investment opportunities in the various countries in Africa, but also what Africa is about, please let us know. We'll be quite happy to oblige. I founded the Belt and Road Hong Kong Center, for example, 2 years ago, and this center sponsored young school children and the teachers and the headmasters and headmistresses to go and visit, excuse the term, off the beaten track countries along the Belt and Road. And they all come back with new vision of life. And so these are the next generation of collaborators. Now, if you want to take a shorter term approach, if there are certain sectors or industries that you're open to Hong Kong or mainland Chinese investments, so you have my name card, let us know. China and Hong Kong included often gives people the impression that we have unlimited ambitions under the Belt and Road Initiative or unlimited appetite under this initiative. Reality is, of course, not. We do have capacity constraints. And one of the constraints that we face at the moment is not so much capital, but human resources. And that's why it is important for us to send people to your countries to see what opportunities are. Thank you.
There is another question about human rights that I want to address briefly. Of course, there are universal aspirations for all mankind. It's part of the human condition. But those aspirations don't have to necessarily be liberal. And if you ascribe rights to men, these rights may be in conflict. If you read the UN Declaration of Universal Rights, or whatever the document is called, every right in there is in conflict with every other right. So what are our priorities? What we've got to do? So to me, equality is a universal aspiration. And equality, and to me, in every country, there shouldn't be, in today's modern world with this abundance of material wealth, we shouldn't have people living under absolute poverty line. Okay, we just should not. It's not unconscionable. So to me, that's a universal aspiration. But liberalism is not delivering on these universal aspirations. In China's socialist system, I think, is doing a little better job. I mean, we make a lot of mistakes, we have a lot of faults, but we don't have these liberal elections. But we are lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. In fact, we're 2 years away from eradicating poverty below the absolute poverty line. About 20, 30 million people left. That's a universal aspiration.
Okay, with that, I'm going to call it to a quit because I have been told to just, I must cut it. I think being over time, I have to now commit harakiri, go outside. But last sentence is, I think that it will be very important for all of us, whether you are from Europe, from Africa, from China, to bring America back to become part of the globalized world. I think the best world forward is where, one, the US, Europe, China, and many other countries should work together rather than having any, especially a major country like the United States, moving increasingly toward isolationism. And that, to me, is my biggest worry. So shall we just leave it at that, and we'll be happy to talk offline. Thank you.
大家好，看完本期视频是不是觉得非常的精彩？这也是香港房地产大佬陈启宗、香港特首梁振英以及VC 投资人李世默首次齐聚在一起，谈论香港的民主、基本法、自由、全球化等问题，非常的有深度，也值得大家回看，细细的品味。梁振英有句话说的非常的好，香港是高度的自治，但不是完全自治。而且香港基本法明确特首的普选是最终的目标，不是现阶段的目标。如果中央政府认为现阶段还不适合普选，那么就不会实施。这也是符合香港基本法规定的。但是香港的某些人呢，不顾基本法，在某些境外势力的支持下，妄图用暴力来达到特首普选的目的，甚至想学主权国家的民主制度，那香港还叫回归吗？简直就是痴心妄想。那么在英国统治时期，香港港督也不是普选出来的，怎么那时候没见你们这么的有骨气，搞各种的运动和破坏？李世默有句话说的非常的好，香港的本次暴乱呢，是送给中央政府的一次礼物，这不正好让中央政府一举解决掉香港发展的隐患，国安法顺利实施，简直就是一记完美的组合拳。烽火都不得不佩服这些境外势力想和中国玩阴的，还是先和中国老祖宗先学学吧。什么叫孙子兵法？什么叫36计？你们也不过是班门弄斧而已。其次，有个法国观众说香港基本法受国际条约的保障，受联合国的监督，这不是胡扯吗？香港事务是中国的内部事务，当然之前被英国占领，回归之前呢，涉及到英国的管辖，怎么就受国际条约保障了？其实这位法国人的想法呢，无非是想把香港事务国际化，让各国都能掺上一脚，让中国无法顺利的接管。这种意识形态的对立和偏见，绝对不是这位观众一个人，这是西方世界国家的普遍的现象。他们怎么可能接受一位差生突然学习成绩变好了，还超过他们了？当然得给你找点事儿。典型的是自己不想学，也不让别人学，不让别人好的小龙心态。说1000道10000，总之就是要充分认识到某些人和势力想用这一套西式的价值观冲击中国的根本，不过也是痴心妄想罢了。本期节目就分享到这里，大家如果有什么不同的观点呢，可以打在评论区，烽火一定在评论区等着大家。